the player has really unlimited freedom to move around the game world, to be able to kind of tackle different challenges and different missions and kind of different moments in the game in different orders. And so our mission structure is fundamentally non-linear. That means that the player can really allow the story to unfold in its own way, dynamically in response to his actions in the game world. What we do is we have a dedicated game designer whose function is to really look at the narrative systems to figure out how all the different kind of events of the game are going to unfold as an outcome of what the player's doing in low-level gameplay, as well as mid-level in terms of the kinds of missions that you're taking, as well as the overall kind of story progression. And that's my job. One of the biggest issues for us is that we really made a decision early on that it was going to be very important to have these buddy characters. The buddies are basically characters that that we want the player to be able to kind of meet. We're not imposing them on the player. The player can kind of find them or not find them, and kind of choose to interact with them or not choose to interact with them. But we wanted to make sure those buddies had a purpose and a function for being in the game. And so we made them important in the sense that they give the player additional objectives that he can perform, but they also allow the player to get rescued if the player gets into big trouble. Well, part of the problem is we wanted to make sure that those buddies felt like they were real characters in the world and that they weren't protected somehow, that we weren't insulating them from being harmed, and that ultimately the player had the power of life and death over those characters. So what we did is we made an early decision that it was going to be possible for the player to kill these characters if either by accident or on purpose. Well, we also needed to make sure that the story wouldn't break if the player literally depopulated the game world with these buddy characters. So that was an important contradiction that we did need to be able to try to overcome. We wanted the story to unfold dynamically. We wanted the buddies to be implicated in the story, but we also wanted to make sure that the buddies were a really critical gameplay mechanic. All of the kind of major villains, if you will, of the game, all the warlords, all of the kind of petty faction bosses, the mercenary lieutenants, all of them ultimately can be killed. And furthermore, the player has a lot of control over when that happens, of the timing of that. In fact, we often say that the player is ultimately the guy that decides who ends up running the factions by the end of the game, because he can choose to assassinate these guys at different points in the game. He can choose to not assassinate them. So we give a lot of power to the player to kind of shape the way the story unfolds, because he's shaping actually which of his enemies are still alive kind of when the game hits its logical conclusion. We've introduced a reputation system which we call Infamy, and the whole concept behind Infamy is that the player's actions, in terms of the kinds of objectives that he's fulfilling, but also the way in which he plays missions, can have the effect of causing his reputation to become more and more infamous. He can try to kind of keep that under control, or he can embrace it and really, essentially become a bastard and really try to kind of increase his infamy, increase his reputation until everyone around him is afraid of him. Now, we're not passing moral judgment on that. We're saying that's a valid way you could take on a situation like this. After all, we are asking him, to go into a war-torn, failed state and deal with, factions and militia and all of these kinds of terrible, moral gray areas. But at the same time, we did want to make sure the player understood there were consequences.